Good morning to everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar, our March webinar, Improving Employee Retention in the Workplace. Great topic. Very excited about our speakers today and just what we'll learn throughout this session. We'll have an opportunity for Q&A during the session, and we look forward to some interactive moments here. Let me go in. We already started, so we'll start with our. So here's our schedule. This is part one of our webinar series on improving employee retention. Part two will be in April. We actually have a date. May we'll look at cybersecurity, and in June the Cal Savers retirement program. So we're looking forward to the next several months and hope you can join us. The next webinar, part two, put on your calendars, take a snapshot of this, is Thursday, April 28th, 2022. We have a new time from 10:30 to 11:30. And again, this will be a sequel to what you will hear today. If there's anything that you want to, there's a lot of, this will be a very beefy, in-depth analysis of what's happening, and there's a lot of areas to take notes. But if you can't take notes or someone who missed, we have a YouTube page, so you can look at your YouTube. This will be on YouTube tomorrow, and you can hear sections of it or the whole session. If you want to have maybe one of your staff members or management team that wasn't able to participate, feel free to use our YouTube page and take notes through that medium. All right, today's schedule. So what we're going to do today is our agenda is our introduction. We're into that. Then we'll have a presentation by Gabriela Romer and Carmen Torres. This is an area where you can have your input. There is a texting Q&A line, and that number is 323-207-5850. Once again, 323-207-5850. So that will be an opportunity for you to text questions in, and then we will present that to our speakers today. Risco insurance. We are now powered by Endzone, so we have a great collaboration with Endzone. We're excited to be part of this Endzone family. A little bit, many of you know what we do. So Risco is a full service agency and specializing in both business insurance and personal lines insurance. Our key, I think, strategy is the value added services, and this is part of it. We collaborate with human capital management, which actually is the production side of this webinar, and they offer education, training, webinars, risk management, and loss control services. We have a great partnership with Socal Partners, Socal Corporate Growth Partners, that also work with us as one of our sponsors. John Gutierrez is the president, and we thank John for his support and what their services are really to help strengthen businesses in different areas, especially education and financial services. So today's topic, employee retention, probably the most challenging season we've ever seen. We've seen numbers that, in terms of resignation, that have broken all types of records. So this is going to be there's a lot of reasons. I think today we'll get a better analysis of why. It's not a simple one answer, but it's more complex. I think it's a culture change. And I think the businesses that are going to do well are the ones that understand the change and make the right, the pivot accordingly. I like this quote: business is not about money, business is about people. And then the classic gold standard Zig Ziglar said, You don't build a business, you build people, and then people build the business. And sometimes it's easy in business to put this in reverse, trying to build a business and then build people. But the reality is we're in business, it's a people business, regardless of what we do, from services to like manufacturing. It's really all about people and building those relationships that make companies thrive. This could be, I guess, a double-edged sword for many of us. Seeing this, I quit is probably one of the worst things that can happen in one's career, especially when you have some key people. On the other hand, sometimes it's most desired, but today there's too many of these I quits, and we want to see what can we do to mitigate this? What can we do to understand why people are resigning, why they're quitting, and what is the lack of satisfaction? But this also presents opportunities. King Solomon said, to every season there's a purpose. And sometimes when you see storms, we had a storm here in Southern California, but today we have sunshine. So there's a purpose behind it. I read this other quote, and it said, when things don't go your way, remember that every challenge, every adversity contains within it the seeds of opportunities and growth. And I think that is something we want to embrace today. We don't want to look at this as just a negative, but opportunities. I think the businesses that are going to thrive the most are the ones that are able to understand, once again, what is happening and to make the appropriate changes for the new culture, because that's what we're really coming into, a new culture. One of the things, again, that I am seeing personally, and I think some of you have experienced that, is the result of poor services now in many areas that usually they excelled. We're seeing poor quality of products that are being delivered. Unqualified employees are being put in positions where they're just not ready for. And the other day I went to one of the more, let's say, more coveted restaurants, chic restaurants in LA, and great write-ups and actually great food, but the wait was just incredible. And it was just interesting how we were with the person I was dining with, we were talking about it, and we were saying that because it's a coveted restaurant, people are kind of going to put up with it. But if it wasn't, it would probably be no repeat business there. But it's a result of what we see today in today's market. So let me start by introducing our speakers. I'm very happy to have both of the speakers are excellent speakers, really understanding the subject matter, and I think I'm very to have them. Gabriela Romer, who's got a master's in psychology. Her topic will be industrial psychology. Thank you, Gabi. I think we can unmute. I don't know if we have you muted, but you can unmute. And thank you for participating today. And Carmen Torres. Carmen Torres has been with us for many years from my HR specialist. She's the owner and chief specialist. Her focus is human resources. Carmen, thank you for joining us this morning. I want to make you. Good to have you. Gabi, good to have you. Thank you so much for participating.
Yes, thank you, Javier. Good morning, everyone. Carmen and I are really excited to provide this education and information to you guys on improving employee retention. So this is a two-part series. And this first part of the series is really going to focus on providing you the information you need to understand kind of what Javier was mentioning, some of these cultural shifts, some of these things that are happening currently right now that have caused the Great Resignation. And so as Javier mentioned, I have a background in psychology. So what I will be kind of bringing to the table is some education, usually using some social psychology and some industrial psychology to help you guys understand why the workforce is kind of moving in this direction and why people are quitting and why people are quitting in great numbers right now. And Carmen's going to bring in her expertise with real live, face-to-face experiences that she's had with her clients and give some details about that as we go along. So we can go ahead and start. Let's go ahead and move on to the next slide. Okay, so why is this topic relevant to you and to your business? Some of you may have been hit hard by the Great Resignation. Some of you may have gotten lucky and are going on business as usual. So that's amazing. This information is good for everybody here. So retaining employees is critical to long-term health and success of a business. So there have been plenty of studies that show that the average tenure of employees, there's a direct correlation to long-term success and growth of a business. And I'm sure that everyone here would love to have growth and success long-term for their business. So this is a key thing that will help that happen for you guys, is making sure you create an environment that's going to retain those good employees for you. On the flip side, turnover is extremely financially costly, whether it's having to hire a recruiter, put on ads online, and then not even to mention kind of the loss of productivity because you have to focus on filling a position. That's costing your business tremendously, especially businesses that are losing people constantly. Turnover is inevitable in every business. It's going to happen. However, we're talking specifically for companies that are having excessive attrition and just turnover in a large period of time, in a small period of time. So in addition to the financial costs, it just takes up a lot of extra time. So, you have the process of putting up the ads and then, going through the interview process, hiring and onboarding. And then by the time you get to, training the person and getting to a point where that position is, secure and they're doing a job, good job without, extra training, that's a lot of time that's being taken away from, everyone that's involved in that process. And also, the rest of the employees that have had to take on the workload of that missing position. Let's go on to the next slide. So just to give you guys a kind of a perspective of like the financial piece of it, Gallup came up with a poll that they did for companies nationwide, and they have found out that the cost of replacing an individual employee can range from 1/2 to 2 times the employee's annual salary. And that is just a conservative estimate. So if we think about a 100-person organization, and if their average salary is around $50,000 a year, they could have turnover and replacement costs of approximately $660,000 to $2.6 million a year. That is a lot of money for just being able to replace someone in a position. And that's money that can be going towards the business, towards growth. And I'm sure a lot of you guys would much rather spend the money on that than having to constantly be finding new people and replacing people. And I think overall, most of you guys are, have the feeling that when you lose someone, it's a hassle to replace them. It's a lot of stress. And so we can find out ways to be able to keep our employees satisfied. That's really going to be helpful for everyone at the end. Next slide, please. So in addition to, the finances, the time, and, just having to find another person to replace these positions that are being lost, high levels of attrition and turnover affect everyone in the company. It's not just that one position or that one department. So when we're seeing, many people quitting in a short period of time, or one specific position that there's, constant turnover, that increases the insecurity for the rest of the employees that are still, in the business and still working. It lowers morale. People talk about it, people are aware about it. And, you don't want your workers to feel like, I can lose my position in any moment, or even start to think, well, maybe I should be looking for another job. So many people are unhappy here. So we don't want to kind of start creating this negative atmosphere. It also increases the workload for other employees. As a lot of you guys know, when you lose, especially a key position, life goes on, business goes on, those responsibilities still need to be completed. Who does them? So unless you have someone come in the interim, usually the workload is kind of distributed to everybody else. And that is just extra stress for everyone. That's a lot, putting on more responsibilities, which might shift everyone else's, ability to do their work. So it's kind of a headache for everyone when there's especially a key position that's, needs to be filled and there's no one in it. And that really just does increase, how quickly other people are being burnt out if they're constantly having to take in other people's responsibilities. And then when it comes to sudden changes in management and supervisory roles, when you have changes higher up in the totem pole or in the ladder, that really ricochets down and affects the employees under them. So whether there's like a gap or, no one in that supervisory role, then you got people that don't have leadership. Or if you pull someone in for an interim position, then you have someone that potentially doesn't really know the employees, doesn't really know specifically that department. And so that's really shaky. And then once you finally do get someone to fill that position, there's the time for them where they have to learn, that relationship, cultivate the relationship with the people beneath them. And then, the employees have to kind of readjust to a new leader and a new, maybe even management style. So it just, turnover and high rates of turnover really just affects the business as a whole. And I know that Carmen had a couple of things she wanted to add to this one.
Thank you, Gabby. Really great points. And, just as you mentioned with the previous slide, around the cost of what's happening, the cost because of this high turnover, many employers would much rather put the monies elsewhere. One of the things that we're discovering is that what employees are asking for is training. And training is where I'm recommending that employers start gathering some of those funds towards. So again, minimizing your loss of team members is critical. One of the other things that I'm noticing here as it relates to the topics that Gabby was referencing here is that employees are having a greater workload. And as a result of that, they cannot put 100% into what they were actually hired to do, right? Because they're now taking on things, they're being spread a little bit too thin. And so what I'm finding is my clients, supervisors are reaching out and stating, I want to write this person up because they are not meeting the requirements of the position. They are late all the time. I'm not getting reports. I'm not getting the daily check-ins that I was getting before. So now what's happening is that the expectations of the employer have shifted, right? They're up higher now. However, the time that's available for the employee to complete the workload is lowering, it's minimizing. So we have to keep in mind, this is where we have to have that flexibility as well, as that why are we writing someone up? What is the purpose of that? And, do we need to write them up, or do we need to make a shift in how we organize the workload that needs to be offered?
Thank you, Carmen. Yeah, that's super important. We can go ahead and move on to the next slide. So, kind of as Carmen is stating, adding these workloads and, this negative morale in the workplace and kind of all of the things that kind of trickle down when we're having these high turnover rates, it's going to affect employee satisfaction. So there is a direct connection between employee satisfaction and productivity, profitability, and consumer satisfaction. And I know Carmen can, I'm sure, tell many stories of how when your employees are happy, that is going to affect your business in such a good way, because that just trickles out of them, and that comes out of that, and that shows. And you can see in the image below, boosted productivity. Research shows that companies that have good level of engagement have much higher likelihood of high growth, and people are going to be motivated to do what they do and excited to do what they do if they're happy and they're content and satisfied. Obviously, if they're feeling good about what they're doing and where they're at, they're not going to have one foot out the door. They're not going to be looking for something better. They're going to be focusing on what's in front of them. So obviously lower attrition. Research is showing that when, especially like departments and groups of, employees that work together, they can function much better as a team if they're fully focused and engaged and happy. And when that happens, that breeds an environment for improved innovation, new ideas, which could, really, really help boost a business and being able to keep up with competition and keep up with, kind of like the changing culture. But they can't do that if they, have one foot out the door or are stressed, or like Carmen said, are spread way too thin. So we need to be able to breed an environment that can produce that kind of creativity. And lastly, which is, I feel like this is pretty, common sense, if your employees are happy, naturally customer service is just going to be better. They're going to have better communication and be able to provide the product and the services in the best way that they can, which is just in turn going to increase loyalty from your customers and increase satisfaction to your customers, which I think in the end, anyone that provides, has a business and provides any kind of service, you want your customers to feel good and be happy working with you. So really the key to all of this is making sure that it starts from inside, and what happens inside the business will naturally exude out to your customers. Next slide. So now that we have kind of really detailed into why is this so important, let's get to the topic and the big question. What is the Great Resignation? So the phrase is in reference to the phenomenon where people across industries are quitting their jobs en masse for better working conditions and opportunities. So that line again, better working conditions and opportunities, not better wages. That's kind of always the top idea, that it's like, oh, people are moving for more money. It's really not that. So surveys predict that 41% of US adults will look for a new job in 2022, this year, and 35% plan to change their careers entirely. So people resigning, like we said, it's not new. It's going to happen. That's just part of business and part of having employees. However, the Great Resignation is different because it is a culmination of all of these factors, which we're going to get into, coming together to cause a huge amount of people resigning at the same time. And it's really hitting certain industries really hard. So, having one person resign, that's already hard enough, but when you have 2-3 people resign, in a short amount of time, that is really tough, especially for smaller businesses. So if you look at the image on the right, they, kind of highlight the top industries that have been feeling this the most. We have retail, hospitality, leisure and travel, manufacturing, technology, and healthcare. I think often the first idea is like, oh, well, COVID-19. Yes, that is a big factor. It is not the only factor, and we're going to get into what those factors are. So go ahead, let's do next slide. Okay, so what is causing this shift? So this is really the important part that I want you guys to key into. This is going to highlight, whether your business is at risk. We're going to highlight some of the red flags and some of the highest predictors of turnover, especially during this time right now. So MIT conducted a study that analyzed the impact of more than 170 cultural topics on employee attrition on several Fortune 500 companies from April through September of 2021, so just last year. So there were 5 topics that were the leading predictors of attrition. So if you look on the right, there's an image there that kind of will show that. And so a toxic culture is 10.4 times more likely to contribute to attrition than compensation. So the study looked at 16 reasons, and these were the top 5. So I'm going to go through each of them, and then at the end, Carmen's going to go ahead and kind of add in input from her experience. So really, let's spend some time with toxic corporate culture, as it by far was the winning reason for why people left in the last year, their jobs. So the way that they described a toxic corporate culture is these employees were feeling disrespected. They were feeling undervalued in their jobs, not feeling like, not only saying like, oh, I'm not being like recognized for my efforts, but like mistreated. And maybe Carmen can kind of go into that in a little bit. Also, they either saw or had a feeling that there was unethical behavior going on in these environments, not going by, laws, things happening kind of under the table, things that just did not make them feel secure. Also, the failure to promote diversity, inclusion, and equity. So these were kind of the top descriptors of what a toxic corporate culture was. And by far, is the biggest predictor of turnover. We have also job insecurity and reorganization. We kind of already touched a little bit about how turnover affects that. So basically what this is that the employees that scored this as one of the reasons why they left their job in the last year, they all had a negative assessment of the future outlook of the business they were working in. So if they felt like, hey, this place is crumbling, I don't know, they're threatening layoffs, things like that, people are not interested in staying in a place where their job is jeopardized or where the company is jeopardized. That is scary. Especially people that have, financial responsibilities and families and things to take care of. You can't afford that. So a lot of people left because of that. No one wants to stay at a job where they feel like they can lose at any minute. The next one is high levels of innovation. So this one's a little bit counterintuitive. I had to look into this one a little bit more, but basically, innovation, it's exciting, it's inspiring, it's interesting, and a lot of people kind of flock to these companies where there's like constantly these like new ideas and innovation. However, innovation in itself is hard work. I mean, you're going against the grain. You're thinking outside the box. You're you're working in a different manner, and things are constantly changing. So that really increases the level of burnout for people, because that's you kind of have to keep up this high level of energy all the time. And so a lot of people have left those companies to go somewhere that's a little bit more static. And then the next one is failure to recognize employee performance. This is not related to compensation, as many people would just assume, like they feel like maybe they're not getting paid enough for what they're doing. This really has to do with like a relationship with your employer. They don't have the relationship with a employer, at all, or it's a negative relationship, or they're just not feeling seen or valued in their place of work. especially people that have a higher work ethic and, provide really excellent work and service. That is a high need for a lot of people, is to be recognized and feel like, they're being validated for what they're contributing and that they are an important part and asset to the company. So people that weren't feeling that, they left. They went somewhere where they were being valued as a person. And the last piece is the poor response to COVID-19, as Carmen suggested earlier. A lot of people that scored on this one had to do with they felt like the companies responded inadequately to COVID or negatively to COVID-19. And a big chunk of the people that kind of scored this one were people that were laid off, and kind of in relation to like shutdowns and things like that. There was a lot of people that were affected by that and just felt like they were not looked after and they were not protected during such a difficult time. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Carmen so she can add in some information.
Thank you, Gabby. And I'll brief through them and I'll add from the bottom. Let's start with COVID, because that is the one area that most employers have been impacted by, while all the others are on a higher level. I think what's happening is employees really are looking at the COVID response that their employer had as a way of measuring them. What I'm finding is that there were many employers who also began to do some surveys, and the surveys were to determine whether or not, or how to bring employees back into the workplace after working remotely for some time. What was happening is that employees rather realized that, hey, this is working. Like, I'm doing just fine working from home. Why don't we need to go back to the workplace? So what was happening is employees were actually saying in these surveys to their employers, we don't want to go back to the workplace. We want to continue and work from home. However, the employer, their need and their business purpose is they want to have the employees back in the office. So what I want to share is that be careful when you do a survey, is know what your intention is. What the purpose of that survey will be, so that when you go back and relay the information, it's based on what the employee has input, has the input that the employee has provided to you as well. Otherwise, what will happen is that employees, again, feel like they're not being listened to. They feel like their time is being wasted. And that's one of the issues that keeps coming up, right? Failure to recognize employee performance. And it's little things. It could just be a thank you. Hey, thank you for getting that, project in on time. I know it was a last minute request. I really appreciate it. Just a little simple note like that. One of the recent things that came up is that an employee mentioned during an exit interview that they felt that, when we were in person, we had weekly meetings, or we had checking in with each other, lunches, and now it just feels like there's nothing, there's no recognition. You're walking down the hall, you peep into someone's office to say a quick hello. Hey, do the same thing online. A lot of businesses use, whether it's Skype or there's so many different platforms, and messaging platforms that are now being used. Send a little note, like if we're on Zoom right now, hey, good to see you, say hello to somebody. So those are the little things that employees are looking for. They're looking for those little check-ins. And then with job insecurity and reorganization, employees are looking to see what's happening. What communication are you providing to them? Did a great manager leave employment for whatever reason? And how are you sharing that information with your team, letting them know, hey, listen, we know we've lost a great team member. This is what our goal is. These are what our next steps are. Communicate with them. Let them know what's happening, because that fear of not knowing is what's going to lead them out of your space. So make sure to connect with them. Let them know what's going on, so that they can feel comfortable, and they can feel, or know that you are working towards supporting them. Thank you, Gabby.
Yes, thank you. Okay, so in addition to, kind of all of these issues that we just highlighted, kind of throwing in also this, a cultural shift in the people that are in the workplace right now. So, baby boomers, they're kind of on their way out of their workforce. A lot of them kind of expedited their retirement during COVID because so much turmoil was going on. That kind of expedited their kind of way out. And so what that means now is that we have a new generation that has taken over the workforce, and that is the millennials. So millennials are over 50% of the workforce at this time. So, well, why does that matter? Baby boomers and millennials, Gen Xers, Gen Z, all have completely different values and, different ideas of what work looks like. So these old ideas of what is a working hard, what is a hard worker, and what is acceptable as an employee has really changed, and their expectations and value of the workplace has changed. So there's really a shift in those values. I think the baby boomers were much more loyal. They're the ones that would stay at jobs for many, many decades, and kind of grind to the ground, did what it took to get the job done. Gen Xers and millennials and Gen Z is very different. They are prioritizing more of a work-life balance, and that is even more important than pay at this point. So they're looking for companies that are offering flexibility, that are promoting this work-life balance. This is so important for these younger generations. I think there's a lot of studies, psychological and social studies, that have come out that's showing, these high levels of stress. They affect our mental health, they affect our body, and they are long-term effects. So these younger generations are using that information and realizing, hey, I don't want to be that person. I want to be able to retire and be healthy mentally and physically, to be able to enjoy and work. Yes, we have to survive. But also my social life and my family life is very important. And so, Carmen's already mentioned a lot of the things that people are looking for right now with that flexibility and working from home and things like that, when possible. But it's so important to realize that, this shift with the new workforce, we have to move with it. We have to accommodate. We have to be able to understand that these values are different if we want to hire people in these younger generations. Also, just in general, the stigma around quitting is really changed. Older generations, like, that was very shameful. You don't quit, you stick it through. That's really not there as much anymore. So millennials are very fickle. They're not, super loyal as other generations. They're fine with quitting, and they're really kind of looking out at their best interests at this point. And just in general, working hard has changed. The new term of work hard, play hard, that's kind of come into terms. And, really it's really a shift that a lot of companies have already picked up on, and others have been kind of functioning with baby boomers and Gen X in mind. And now we're going to have to make changes for millennials and Gen Z that really are not looking for wages, but are looking to be happy in life, feeling valued, and feeling like they're part of a good, harmonious culture. Next slide. So now we talk about COVID-19. I think there's a lot of, pretty obvious ways that COVID-19 has, impacted this resignation in this stage right now. So obviously shutdowns, people feeling insecure in certain types of industries and moving to different industries, family dynamics. When we have families that multiple people are working, some had to leave their jobs in order to stay home with kiddos because, you know, we have distance learning now. We have daycare shutting down every other week. So, you know, there's a lot of, you know, reasons that are directly related to COVID that have caused these resignations. But during these shutdowns, a lot of people use that time to kind of reskill, relearn, and re-educate so that they can, once things open back up, come back and make these shifts in whether it's their career or, you know, find different positions that are more suitable for what they're looking for. Next slide. So pandemics in history have brought about a lot of societal change. So this is not the first pandemic, and hopefully, you know, that probably won't be the last one. But in history, we can look back and see that every time we had a pandemic, it brought about huge societal change. And you know, anthropologists and people who study these things have realized that, you know, when a society or culture is put into a crisis mode, you know, it kind of puts us in a position where we start to kind of look at and kind of, you know, have these like moments where we have these epiphanies like, oh my gosh, what are we doing with our life? So, you know, a lot of changes are being made, society changes. We kind of seen that with all the movements going on with, you know, society. And so this is just an added with the labor and how things are being changed in the labor market. Next slide, please. So how does this impact the BIPOC community? This is the Black, Indigenous, people of color community. I know a lot of businesses employ a lot of the Latino people of color, and really is no difference. A lot of people are being impacted by this across races of wanting to leave their jobs and move on. I'm going to have Carmen share a little bit about her experience with the Latino population and how she's seen those shifts recently in the last year.
Thank you, Gabby. You know, you mentioned in the previous slide just about, you know, people who actually took on new skill sets during COVID time. They had some time to, you know, think about what's important to me. What do I want to do? What's fun for me? And so that's what we're seeing now. Now we're seeing a year later, you know, after gathering some of those skills, what I'm seeing even through exit interviews is that people moving from office positions, from restaurant positions. You know, I recently had someone who shifted from a really great public position and she went into being an airline attendant. And you know why? Because it's completely different from what she's been currently doing, completely different from where her education lies. However, she's looking at what is important to me. You know, what have I always wanted to do? I've always wanted to travel, is what she said. So people are now looking at, you know, it's not so much like Gabby mentioned earlier, right, about the money. She's actually going to be making a little bit less money, but she's going to be feeling a passion that you know, she wasn't getting from her current employer. I'm seeing restaurant workers, also women in particular, who are leaving their posts to go into management positions. Why is this happening? It's happening because employers who are getting that step ahead. What they're doing is they're opening up opportunities for those employees who are not getting the opportunities in other locations. They're realizing that, you know, if I pay just a little bit more, I'm going to get what I need. So, you know, take all of that into consideration. You know, are you ready to lose a team member, or is there an opportunity that you can consider right now to hold on to the team that you have, particularly if they're really great workers and they've been with you for a while?
Yes, thank you, Carmen. Next slide. So yes, this is kind of something Carmen already touched on, so we can go ahead and move on to the next slide. So here are just some stats just to give you perspective of kind of where different communities are at in terms of the Great Resignation. So 64% of Hispanic and Latinos are likely to look for a new job within the next year. We got 49% of Blacks and African Americans, and then 30% of Whites and Caucasians. So we're seeing a big disparity here. I mean, you know, kind of how Carmen mentioned, there's a high number of, you know, Hispanic and Latinos that are making these big, bold moves. And I don't think that's a coincidence. I think they're taking advantage of, you know, the time, taking advantage of the fact that they kind of have these open opportunities now. Before, where you had like 100 to 200 people, you know, applying for one position, it's not like that anymore. You know, there's more open positions than there are people that are unemployed. So people have option now, and they are taking advantage of that, especially the people in this community. Next slide, please. So this was, it's a lot of information, a lot of kind of, you know, background and perspective. Why did you need all this information? Why couldn't we just cut to the chase and tell you what to do? The reason for that is because education is essential to bring about change. So education and information is power, right? If you know what's happening, you can better make the moves and the changes that you need in order to move your business forward and to make the changes that maybe you didn't realize you needed to make to stay up with the times. So we wanted to give you the education first, and then we're going to go ahead and move into the part 2, which is really going to be the practical application of what you can do to implement to your business. And Carmen's going to go ahead and kind of review what we'll be talking about in the next session.
Yes, and so the next session will really, you know, go into probably a lot of the questions that you have today. You know, what can you do to accommodate some of those shifts in the culture? How can you modernize the business to adapt to the changing times? You know, what are some of the practical strategies that you're going to be able to implement? Those are definitely, you know, some of the topics that we're going to be mentioning. So I believe at this point, we do have an opportunity for you to ask some questions, and hopefully we'll be able to answer all of those for you.
Thank you, Carmen and Gabriela. Thank you. Wonderful just topic and presentation content. I wrote down you know, a gazillion notes here. So what I want to do is we want to give this opportunity. We've got about a little bit over 10 minutes just to ask, you know, if there's questions. I'm sure there's a lot of questions out there, so you can text your question in and just cover some of the areas. And it's just fascinating, this whole thing about the generational change. And I think that's really the key, and understanding, you know, I guess I looked at that graph and I see myself at the end, at the, you know, what they call the gray tsunami of the baby boomers, you know, really terming out of the workforce and moving on and being, you know, having a new generation come in. And I think that's the key. How do we engage? I think there's a great opportunity, and you have to really understand this new generation. So I think with that, I'm going to have, want to thank Miley for having managed this and putting this together, and have her, she's a millennial, ask the first question that we have. So Miley, why don't you take over? And then if you have any questions, again, please text them to the number 323-207-5850.
So we do have one question for you both. How can employers keep millennials engaged?
Do you want to start with that, Carmen?
Sure. I think, you know, one of the things that I'm noticing is that millennials do like communication, and but what is their form of communication, right? Their form of communication right now is not meetings. Their form of communication is Slack, text, Skype, you know, all of these little platforms that require a little bit of technology. So you know, even it could be a message, a note that you send to them. That is definitely one way to connect with them, to keep them engaged. Ask them questions, you know, ask them what's happening. You know, what are you hearing out there? What's going on out there that you think we should be considering or implementing? What are your, you know, what are your coworkers talking about? What are your friends talking about? I would say that's definitely one way to keep them engaged.
Yeah, and just to kind of go off of that, I think you really touched on a big one. So millennials definitely grew up with technology. We were born with it pretty much. And so we want things as efficient and as quick as possible. So you kind of hit that with on the nail, Carmen, of making sure your business is kind of up to date with technology. It's efficient. And also just on top of that, making sure you're keeping in mind that work-life balance, that's so important to them. You know, they love flexibility. So whether it's creating, and I know not every business has this opportunity, but creating like hybrid, you know, where, you know, there's times where you come in, there's times where you can work at home, there's times where you can hold a business somewhere else, business meeting somewhere else. I think all of that is just really important for them, and knowing that work is not their number one. It's really kind of creating a balance. And if you can support and create an environment for that, that's going to be huge for them and very appealing for them.
Okay, thank you guys. Another question, if you can elaborate on how millennials thinking differs from baby boomers.
Yeah, so kind of like, you know, I mentioned before, they are have a lot more education about certain things related to, you know, mental health, kind of what is considered like healthy and unhealthy. They definitely have more awareness of certain things like that, and kind of are learning really from the boomers and the Gen Xers. So seeing that they, you know, come with this like kind of a little bit more, I want to say like self-awareness. So with that, they want to make sure that they are, you know, protecting themselves and keeping themselves healthy mentally and emotionally. I think that's really huge as to why this like idea of toxic work culture is number one reason for leaving. They're becoming a lot more aware that like certain behaviors, certain interactions are just not okay. They are not going to put up with certain things that maybe other generations did because they were told they had to, and because, you know, it was shameful to kind of stand up to leadership. So they kind of are a little bit more assertive in that way. And also, because of that, and being a little bit more protective and self-focused of themselves, they also kind of the downfalls, they do lack that loyalty to, you know, where they're working. And so it has to be able to kind of fit with their values for them to stay. So, you know, there's always pluses and minuses to different things, but I think that is kind of the biggest shift for them, is using the past, using that information and studies that have come out to kind of really create a different life for themselves than maybe what they saw that their parents did.
And I'll add briefly to that, to say that, you know, one of the things that is really important to them as it relates to their health and their well-being is that, does my employer care? Does my employer care about me? You know, and so where before, right, you don't have to ask employers or employees, how are you doing? How was your weekend? How, you know, how did that soccer game go with your kids? That wasn't a need in the past, but today it is. Today, employees want to know that you think of them as a person, not as a number. And that's one of the biggest differences right now between millennials and those of us who are a little older.
Okay, thank you. One last question. If you can speak a little bit on the dress code and where can you draw the line on what's appropriate and inappropriate?
Carmen, I think this is one that you can probably better answer than I can.
Yes, and so let me make sure I understood the question correctly. Is the question around dress codes? Can you repeat the question, Miley?
Yeah, if you can draw a line, or where do you draw the line on what's appropriate and inappropriate in a workplace?
Yeah, so, especially again with millennials and, the older generation, what's happening is, and it depends if you're on Zoom or, in person, is that dress code has been a question that's come up quite a bit. What you want to do is you really want to look at your policy. What policy do you have in place? And is the policy still aligned to the current times? Does your policy say, wear a skirt and stockings? I mean, that might be a little bit outdated. So you want to look at, what is a comfortable, thing. If wearing athletic wear is not acceptable, make sure that you note that on there. No leggings or no joggers. Jogger pants are very, very popular right now. They look incredibly cute. A lot of people wear them very well, but they might not be appropriate for the workplace, right? So what you want to do is you want to really look at your policy and make sure that that policy is aligned with what you want. Make sure it's clear. If it's no strappy tops, then it's no strappy tops. For example, I'm wearing this could be considered an athletic wear top. It's a zippered sweatshirt, but it's a little fancy. I mean, it's a little, on the nicer side. Am I wearing it with slacks? Because you can wear it with slacks and loafers, and it still looks, business casual appropriate. If it's jogging pants and sneakers and a t-shirt and a cap, that's probably not going to be appropriate. Again, I think the most important piece here is for you to really assess your policies and make sure that those are aligned with what you really want to portray.
Carmen, this is Javier. Thank you, Gabriela. Just let me, really insightful, wonderful presentation. Thank you to both. I want to just kind of close. One of the things that was, as they were speaking, talking about this new generation, and some of the characteristics. One of the things that I will say that I've seen and experienced is our culture has also changed in many ways, and ethical values and whatnot. And there are a lot of, this generation is entering where their foundation, their family foundation, isn't quite as intact as, let's say, my generation, baby boomers, high divorce, single parent, whatnot. I believe the other kind of hidden factor is nurture. I believe where the firm can nurture and mentor this generation is really a necessity versus just a transactional relationship. But I think that's important. I think that they're looking for a place of nurture that maybe they never received. And maybe the employer is almost like a fatherly figure at times, or mother, depending on the dynamics. And I think that those in management need to see that, because again, we said earlier, business is not about money, it's about people. And I think the greatest value that we could have in a business is developing leaders and leaders in this new generation. And I think that's something that we need to really focus in on, in that type of leadership, mentoring and nurturing that generation.
If I could really
Yes.
quick jump in on that, I think that's really good. I think you've definitely brought about this idea of relationship, and that is really a key thing for millennials this age. They've realized how important relationships are. They want to cultivate those, which is why they do want that balance, to be able to have time and to have emotional energy to cultivate these relationships outside of the workplace. That's why they want the balance. But in the workplace, they also want those relationships too, with each other in terms of like their, coworkers, but also with the people that are, supervising them. So being able to cultivate an environment where they can create these relationships, that's really going to be really helppful to them and bring them in.
Not only will it do that, but it will also engage them enough that they want to commit, because they care so much about what the business is doing, which is one of the reasons why your mission and your vision are so critical, is that if that's clear to them and they understand why you're doing things, not just because, it's going to bring in money, but really what is the purpose? What is your purpose?
Right.
So sharing your story, about why you're in business, sharing a little bit about how the business came about. Those are the kind of things that connect the team members, not just millennials, but everyone. And so be a little bit more open, be a little bit more sharing, be a little bit more accessible is what I'm hearing. Is employees want to have access to their leadership team.
Really
Great.
good.
Yeah, and we're right on time. Excellent. So again, walk away with that. The shepherding is so important, corporate shepherding in your business. So we look forward. Once again, thank you, Carmen and Gabriela. Excellent presentation. And thank you for those that joined us today. Calendar, save your date, April 28th, Thursday, April 28th at the same time at 10:30. We look forward to any of your comments. Our information is there. Please, it's also helpful to hear back from you of what you'd like to hear and anything on, especially the second session that we're going to have, the part 2. So have a great rest of your day. May God richly bless everyone that was participating. Bye for now.